Hello there, beautiful people. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, The Sara Show. My name is Dr. Sara, and I am your host for this show because it's all about me and my story and my journey, but also kind of not really. It's kind of the show where so far we've been talking all things medicine to acting, chasing your dream life, building your dream life, figuring out when it's time to quit what you thought would be your dream job in order to take a chance on your actual dream job. And honestly, there was not an upload last weekend, or last week rather. I'm trying to upload new episodes every Tuesday, and I did stick with that for January. It was 4 weeks in a row. And then I missed the first week of February, and I'm a bit gutted about that, number one, because when I give my word to something, I like to commit. But we're back this week, and as I was reflecting on why I missed a week, while I could say that I was disorganised and busy, I think deep down, part of it was because I was a little bit nervous about this episode. I was talking to my boyfriend about it, and I was kind of telling him how there's some stuff that I just don't quite feel ready to speak about, and not in the sense of like, it's not that big of a deal, but I suppose there's a safety of talking about your journey when you have arrived there, right? And here I am, a fairly new beginning actress, still trying to book roles, getting the typical, I've received my fair few rejections since starting this podcast. And so you can get a bit of, I don't even know if I'd call it imposter syndrome, because it doesn't feel like it's due to feeling like an imposter. It feels very real. It's kind of like, wait, who am I to be talking about these things? However, I do think there is a huge gap in the conversation about certain careers and about certain decisions we make in life, like leaving careers in order to make new ones. Because, like me, most people don't really want to speak about it until they've succeeded. So we hear about the success stories, we hear about the people who hate their job, but that middle in between where you're still making the journey and you still don't have the end result can feel a little unknown. So I suppose with this podcast, the whole goal is to make that middle bit a bit more known, to share my journey, to share what it's been like quitting what is a really reliable and predictable career for one that is notoriously known to be less reliable and less predictable. What it's been like juggling the stress of that, the finances, all of that. And so I think while I was preparing to sit here and tell you about how I decided to leave full-time medicine, like what made me decide that, I just felt a bit shy and felt a bit nervous. So what I've done is I've decided to just make this a chatty one. So I'm not going to have like a do this, do that step-by-step approach. If you would like that step-by-step approach about how you can decide whether or not to quit your job, or things that I considered quite practically, you can find that on the episode that I uploaded a fortnight ago called Should You Quit Your Job? Here's how to find out. But on this one, I'm just going to chat. And I'm going to tell you my story, because I think a lot of people have had similar experiences, whether you consider yourself to be similar or not. I think for most of us, no matter where you are in your career, in your job, in your life, you've experienced a moment where you've looked around and there's a lot to be grateful for. But you're also like, this is not what I want. This is so far from what I want. This is not where I'm thriving. And you try to make it work because you're told that it should work, but something has to change. And that's essentially what happened for me. I got to the point where I was absolutely miserable. And I will start by saying that this is a hard thing to discuss. A lot of my friends are medics, they are doctors. A lot of people listening to this will be medics and doctors who I know in person. And I don't want to disparage the career. I love doctors and I love medicine, truly. I think it's one of the best, most fulfilling, deep, meaningful careers a person can possibly do. And so it's difficult to express this because the truth of it does live in this dichotomy, or this apparent contradiction where I'm saying medicine is an amazing career, but also I was absolutely broken while doing full-time medicine. And I think both are true. So just to say that in the get-go, that if you're listening to this and you are a medical doctor, just thank you, first of all, thank you, because I know that everyone has a different experience, and you might be watching this thinking, well, I've had a great time, Sarah. I don't know what you're on about. And even if so, still thank you, because it takes a heck of a lot of work. It takes so much work to qualify as a doctor, to continue practicing. It requires so much sacrifice. And we really do need doctors, as so many of my acting teachers tell me when they're like, oh, I heard you used to be a doctor. We need doctors. Why are you leaving? They're literally like, no, don't leave. Go back and do medicine. But yeah, I think it's because we do need doctors, and they contribute incredibly to society. And I'm definitely complimenting myself there, but just to say that as a get-go, this is not a podcast intended to put people off medicine. In fact, someone messaged me on Instagram saying that they've always felt called to medicine, and asking me what they should do, if it's worth it, given my experience, that I had such a bad experience, is it still worth it? And I messaged them back like, dude, if you feel called to something, oh my goodness, please try, please go for it, please do it. And I told them all the good things about medicine, as well as all of my experiences. But I also was very clear that different people have different experiences. So just because that was my experience, it's not necessarily going to be yours. So yeah, just to put that out there first. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into my story of how I decided to leave full-time medicine in order to pursue a career in acting. God, please guide my words, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So where to start? So my name's Sara. I am Welsh, so I grew up in the valleys of South Wales. I am a child of two brilliant Nigerian parents. I'm the youngest of five. And we grew up in a very academic family, to the point where me and my mum will even still joke about today whether or not she pushed me, or my parents, both of them, pushed me into medicine, because I think it was probably a beautiful duality of their beliefs, which definitely became, and probably to a certain extent still are, my beliefs about the importance of academic success. Their desires for me to have a stable, good career, which again are still definitely became my desires to have a stable, good career, and what they encouraged and supported me in. And I'm really grateful. I'm really deeply grateful to my parents. I think that we can sometimes, when we've noticed that something is wrong, the pendulum can swing too far the other way, to the point where people are like, oh my gosh, it's so bad of parents to encourage their children to do a career that they don't want to do, or that isn't the best career for them. But actually, I'm incredibly, deeply grateful for my parents, because the older I get, the more I look back and I'm like, wow, they did really... That sounds so cocky, doesn't it? My parents did such a good job. Look at me. But no, for real, they did so well. They moved to this country. They really cared for me and my siblings, and just gave us so many opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So I sit here on the shoulders of giants, and I'm grateful for the huge encouragement that they gave me to study medicine. So growing up, I went to school. I went to a publicly funded school, in terms of it was a government funded school. And the area I grew up in was not the richest of areas. There was a period where my mum homeschooled me, and people always laugh when I tell them that, because they're like, oh, homeschool jungle freak, like that quote from Mean Girls. But honestly, the best school I ever went to. My mum really filled me and my sister with so much confidence in who we were. And we learned so much. We did singing, we did art. So for those of you who may or may not know, my late aunt was a brilliant artist called Chinwe Chukwuogo Roy. You can Google her. And she painted the Queen for her 2002 Jubilee. I had the honour of being there. But just to give a background of how much we learned, in terms of, we had the artsy side in our family. My mum used to do theatre. She would perform in theatre in Nigeria. She was not new to this. So we would practice those things. We would learn how to sing. We would learn, we learned the Greek alphabet, Greek history, Roman history. We did all of these subjects that I wouldn't have gotten to do unless, if she hadn't taken us out of school for a few years. as well as the main curriculum. And because I was 2 years younger than my sister, I actually ended up learning way more than was my actual curriculum. I remember when I went back to school, I'd been doing math stuff from 2 years ahead of me. So I remember going back to normal school after the period that we were homeschooled and just being a little bit bored. I was I was constantly finishing my math equations. I was bored because I'd done it all before. So props to my mama for being such a good teacher. Honestly, as a grown woman now, I'm like, whoa, how did she do that? Like, how did she have 5 kids under the age of 6 and homeschool 2 of us? Like, insane. So thanks, mama, if you're listening to this, which I believe she is because she is so supportive and sweet. Anyway. So that was kind of my childhood. There was a period where we did some acting classes. My mum put us in for acting classes and I absolutely loved it. It was the best thing. I just remember feeling so artsy, so intelligent, having so much fun, feeling so confident. I was listening to Norah Jones CDs. You know, the one that's like, sunrise, sunrise, feels like morning in her eyes. I had this scarf. You know, you have these bitty memories. I had this pink and purple, but like muted pink and purple, because this was my sophisticated artiste phase. Pink and purple scarf that I absolutely adored. And I would swish it around my neck and I'd be like, I'm an actress. I even remember having an audition for Doctor Who to play a child in a family for a Doctor Who episode. And I remember just thinking, well, I'm not going to get it because the family's not going to be black. I think it also had something to do with the fact that the people I was reading in with were not black. And I was like, I can't actually be your daughter. Like, how is this going to work? And this was like back in the day. I think I was somewhere between the ages of 8 and 11. My mum can correct me on that. But I was pretty young and I probably did about 6 acting lessons total. We then, unfortunately, had to stop the acting lessons because just couldn't afford it. And I was gutted. And I remember absolutely begging my mum to let me go back. But we just couldn't afford it. And so I did carry on performing. I would sing in my church. I would write songs with my sisters at home and we would make videos and perform them in the family. At school, I would always audition for the plays. I would do all of that. And alongside this, I was also an athlete, you guys. So I would do athletics and I competed for Wales. I broke records as a junior. I won championships. I won the British Championships as a sprint hurdler. Like, I was very serious. And then alongside that, I did my academic work. So I was studying science. I loved the sciences. I loved maths. I did further maths at GCSE, felt super duper grateful for that. And I say all this to say, I had this upbringing where you were not only allowed to do and be everything, but you were actively encouraged. I was actively encouraged to try new things. I was actively encouraged to do all things as though unto the Lord. Like, I would revise so much, well, not that much, but like as much as I needed to get the grades. My parents would really encourage me to do things well. And I thought that was normal, honestly. I think that we all think our upbringing is normal until we grow up and we see that not everyone has the same upbringing. And I enjoyed it. I was grateful. I'm very grateful for my childhood. I say all that to say, as I got older and it came time to choose what I would study, I remember being really sad when I had to drop certain subjects to do my GCSEs. I was like, what do you mean I have to drop art? What are you talking about? I love art. Of course I want to study art. I've been drawing my whole life. Why would I drop art? But lo and behold, I had to drop art. And then when you get to A-levels, and I was like, what do you mean I have to drop music? Oh, actually, no, I didn't drop music. I did music at A-levels. But I had to drop all these other subjects that I still loved and I still thought were a huge benefit in order to tailor my CV to get into medical school to be a doctor. Even choosing to be a doctor, I knew I loved people. I loved helping people. I wanted a good job. Like, that was something I was taught, that you should get a good job. And I loved a challenge, and people kept saying medicine's really hard, and I'm like, bring on the challenge, because as I've mentioned, I was raised to not shy away from a challenge. And for those of you who may know of or come from a Nigerian background, you'll know that often we can joke that Nigerian parents don't ask you what you're going to study at university. They ask you whether you will study law, medicine, or engineering. And be it coincidence or true, the fact is that two of my sisters were already studying law and were lawyers, and one of my brothers had done engineering, the other one had studied economics. So, was there only one box left to tick? I'll let you be the judge of that. But what I will say is that I was a willing participant. I wanted to study medicine. I didn't feel like I had the epiphany that some people have, but it was good, and I was good at it, and I enjoyed the work experiences that I did. I remember doing a work experience in dentistry and thinking it wasn't for me. With all due respect to dentists, thank you for all your work too, but that was not for me. That was very clearly not for me. So I applied to medical school, I get in, I'm buzzing, time in my life. And when I get there, I quickly realise that medical school is not designed to be conducive with extracurricular activities. So up until this point, I was regularly singing in my church. I was regularly performing in little plays and shows. I would busk with my guitar. I used to draw art and sell the art to people. I would do like custom portraits for people for money. That was my part-time job. I had part-time jobs, and I was competing as a Welsh athlete. So I had all these hobbies. I get to medical school and suddenly it's like, Suddenly it's like, oh, you do not have time. You do not have time to do all this extracurricular stuff. And I really struggled with that. I struggled in my exams. I did not do well in my first year because I tried to carry on doing all the other stuff. And I was like, I'll just do what I did in A-levels and cram last minute. Can't do that in medical school. I did not do well. I had to redo those exams. I didn't repeat the year, but I had resits in my first year. And it was so hard. It was the first time I'd ever failed anything. I genuinely had like a proper identity crisis, which is so sad. Can you imagine failing an exam gives you an identity crisis? But yeah, that's the background of it. And I made the decisions. I made the decisions to stop doing professional athletics in order to complete my medical degree. I was highly encouraged and also made the decision to stop pursuing music and singing and performing places. That's a whole nother story, but I had to stop that in order to continue my medical degree. And so I found that all I really had time for were a few musical theatre productions at university where I could just squeeze them in. And to be fair, I still did have lots of extra hobbies, but they all had to bow down to me getting my degree. So I started my YouTube channel, I had a fitness society, but I wasn't doing things to the level that I used to do them. I wasn't competing internationally for my country anymore. I wasn't, gigging at places and writing songs anymore. And I accepted that. And then I graduated and I started work. And I was just, things were new and there were lots of changes, but I essentially was a bit miserable. I went from being in a city with all my friends at uni to moving back nearer to where I grew up, back to the city of Cardiff, starting work. And, it's just change, right? You don't have all your friends. You don't have your community. You have to make a new community. Even though I'd been to school in Cardiff, things had changed. People had moved, friends had moved on, had to make this new community. I would find myself working the job and just feeling like, I don't think I enjoy this. I don't think I'm happy. But I was so confused and so overwhelmed, and there was so much going on that I didn't really sit with it. I didn't really address it. I thought that I just wasn't good enough, to be honest. I think there was a big part of me that just thought I wasn't good enough because, especially from medical school to working as a junior doctor, so when you do your first year of medicine, it's a huge jump. One of my senior doctors said something which really resonated with me, which was that the thing that's so difficult about your first year as a doctor is that you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you should know. So it's almost depending on the job that you work. I worked on general surgery, elderly care, and so I was doing surgical on-calls, medical on-calls. It can be a lot. Like, it can be really, really difficult. And so I was struggling, and, we were understaffed a lot of the time. As much as I had great teams that I worked with, and I'm so, so grateful for my colleagues, my first year of work was incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I remember speaking to my friends about it, and some of them weren't having the same experience. So some of the girls who I'd studied with at university, some of them were having a great time. Others of them were also having a similar experience. And I remember having insomnia. I couldn't sleep. I would get migraines all the time, to the point where it was really disrupting my work. And I would live for my leave. I would the thing I wanted the most was annual leave. It was what I would live for. Now, there were some parts of the job that I really did enjoy, but I felt like I was chronically not rested enough. Like, even after 9 days of annual leave, I would come back and still be so emotionally and physically exhausted. There was a lot of loss. There were some patients that we lost who, honestly, if I still think about it to this day, I feel, I can feel the emotion in my body. And in hindsight, well, not even in hindsight, it was at the very time I remember us feeling quite unsupported. There was a patient that me and my colleague, we were both F1 doctors, we'd been doctors for about 4 or 5 months, that we lost in a way that was really difficult. It was a really difficult loss. We had known this patient for a while. And the ward was so busy that immediately after we lost the patient, we had to just go back to work. And there was there's no question about it, right? You've got other patients. You can't just sit there and feel your feelings. You need to get back to the ward. You need to get back to doing work. And we sat there in silence, getting on with our jobs on the ward. And we kind of looked at each other and we're like, are you okay? And they were like, no. And I was like, no, me neither. And we went through our diaries trying to find a time where we could talk about it. We were like, we need to have some kind of space for junior doctors to talk about loss and to talk about the stress of this job. And it's not funny. Sorry, sometimes I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. But as we went through our rotas, we obviously found that there was no time. We were like, when I'm on call, you're on call. When you're not on call, I'm not, we just couldn't find a time where we could do it. And so we just kind of let that go. And the thing that brought me solace and that got me through that time was not only my relationship with God, but was writing. I would write poetry. I've got notebooks full of poetry about my experiences as a first year doctor. And some of them, like, literally to this day, I'll read and just get emotional. But it was like, once I had grieved, if I could finish that poem, it meant that I could close that chapter. It meant that I could wake up the next day and say, I did my best, and I have to take another step forward. So for me, a lot of the time I was like, am I too emotional for this job? However, in other situations where, patients really need someone who is emotionally connected and can communicate and empathize and be professional, I really felt like I was so good at the job. To this day, I really believe that is something that I can give my patients, and I'm so grateful to be able to do that. But I say all this to say, early on in my career, I just had no idea who I was as a doctor. So the first year, I would say, and I don't use the word traumatic lightly, I would say there were certain experiences that were fairly traumatic that really gave me a very negative perspective of what it meant to be a full-time medical doctor. And I say that because I know that that's not everyone's experience. However, unfortunately, I know that is a lot of people's experience. So I think it's important to talk about that. While I had wonderful colleagues, a lot of my colleagues were also overworked and didn't have the time or the experience to be my emotional, not that I was crying every day, but there wasn't the support there for the support to be there, if that makes sense. And so while there were so many good experiences, and I made so many new friends who I'm still friends with to this day, and I learned lots, and I got to literally impact lives, and I'm so proud of that. It was an incredibly, incredibly difficult time. So then the pandemic happened. The pandemic happened, and I decided to take some time out to do some part-time work, but then I was applying to go back into training. And during this time where I was supposed to be doing part-time work, I got put on a full-time rota to be able to support the ward during the pandemic. And so I was working full-time again. I had no issue with that. It felt like being drafted. I was like, oh my goodness, my skills are needed. Absolutely, absolutely no issue with that. During this time, I still had my YouTube channel. I would upload my fitness videos, so I still had that hobby. And I was still singing in my church, so I was still doing things related with music. A producer contacted me to invite me to do a BBC show with Gareth Malone. It was an NHS lockdown choir. And so I did that show and it was amazing. It was so brilliant. It was such a pleasure to work with Gareth, to work with the producer, Dion, like so many brilliant people that I got to meet and learn from. And I guess I had like a real lined up thing of like, oh, this is my creative passion and what it means and what it does for me and what I believe I can bring through that. And then this is my work as a doctor. And I suppose it reminded me that I felt like I had a work to do in the creative space, and communicating with all these people who were working in the creative space. I was like, oh, this is possible. This is possible. It's not, you don't necessarily have to get, a traditional job, whatever that even means. I'm doing air quotation marks for those who are listening and can't see the video. But I guess I hadn't realized that, right? Because I had had such an academic focus my whole life and the creative things had always been more for enjoyment. And, you'd still do them well and try to succeed in them, but they were never really presented as a viable career to me. And so seeing these people have literal successful careers, people you've heard of and people you've never heard of, but that is what they do day in, day out. They work in the creative space. I was like, what? And so that was quite a moment for me. And one of the specific things that happened was that I'd actually been applying to go back into training. So I'd had my time off and I was like, right, it's time to go back into full-time medicine and build a proper career like you're supposed to, right? Become a consultant. And so I had done all the exams. I'd worked my way to applying for this job, and I was hopeful that I would get a job in the south of England, back in training, doing A&E, which is what I wanted to do. Now, there was one moment that I think was very significant in me making the decision to leave full-time medicine. It was when I was sat at home filming, actually, for the BBC show. I was watching the then Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, announce that there would be a lockdown. And during the announcement, he said something like, we're going to cut off all of the non-essentials. And he included the arts in that. And I remember being sat there on the sofa, filming with the remote filming, so I would have to film myself for the show, which funnily enough, YouTube prepared me for perfectly. But I was filming myself watching this. And I was like, what? What did he just say? He's going to cut the non-essentials? And I was just like, the arts have been absolutely essential in getting me through this time. Because for me at that time, I was in a pretty bad state. I had some health issues going on. I'd been started on a medication that made me clinically depressed. Then there was the whole pandemic. You couldn't see people. I was back in full-time work. There was a lot going on. But what I had really enjoyed was getting home and watching Netflix, specifically South Korean dramas, to the point where I would get home absolutely exhausted. I would stay up and watch 3 to 4 hours of these dramas. I would not get enough sleep, but I would feel something. I would feel alive. I would feel hope. I'd be able to escape from my own existence and enter this new world for a few hours. And it really did help me get up and go to work the next day. And so when I heard the Prime Minister say this, I just thought, what are you talking about, non-essentials? Yes, it is essential what I do as a doctor to keep people alive. But what do we keep people alive for? What are we here for? What are we doing? What is the essence of who we are as humans? What is it that we can contribute to each other? We're not just machines. It's not just about each cell doing what it's supposed to do. It is about the human soul doing what it is supposed to do. And we do that through the arts. The arts, they're what we hand down generation after generation. Yes, we hand down progress, but the arts are the celebration of this life. And that's a big, vague term, isn't it? The arts. But in the way that I experienced school, it was very much sciencey people, artsy people. And it was like this wall between them. And you had to pick a side. And I had officially chosen the sciencey side. But it was this moment where I was like, what are you on about? We are all this complex mixture of both, and the arts are essential. The arts are essential to a living society. They're healing. They're so healing. You know, I had experiences when I was looking after a patient who was confused, screaming down the ward. I'd already stayed like 3 hours late on the ward, and this patient was medically stable. There was nothing else we would have added medically, but they would not settle if their family wasn't there. And I remember hearing how distressed they were and being like, I have to think of something. I can't just, we can't just carry on. Something has to be done. How do we calm this patient down? And I walked into the patient's room and I managed to ask them, like, what is your favourite hymn? I looked through their notes and I saw that they were Christian. And so I was like, well, this is an elderly Welsh Christian. There's got to be a hymn that they used to sing growing up. And so, having gone to church my whole life in the little local Welsh church in the valleys, and they'd said a name of a hymn and I was like, what hymn is that? I had no idea. And I look on YouTube and I managed to find one video of this hymn that the patient said that was their favourite hymn. One video that had been uploaded like 9 years ago, 9 years prior to this date. And I put on that song, I opened the video, I put on that song and I put my phone down. And the patient, who no one could get to settle down and stop screaming, stop shouting when their family wasn't there, this patient who had, some cognitive difficulties, they went silent and still. And it was like that song transported them back like 50 years. And bearing in mind, this is just me and the patient in this hospital ward that I should have left 2.5 hours ago, but it was so busy. I was the only doctor on the ward, I'd stayed late. In that silence, the patient begins to sing this hymn word for word. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. That hymn that someone wrote, however many years ago, that someone decided to put on YouTube, it probably had about 1,000 views over 9 years. It gave that patient peace in a way that none of the drugs that we had could. And I just stood there and I watched. I watched as the patient sang every single word, start to finish. I felt like in that moment, that was my vocation. My phone was on low battery, I remember. And so I had to find a charger, plug it back in. And I just kept, because on YouTube back then, I don't think you could automatically replay something. So I would pop out and then every 5 minutes later or 3 minutes, it wasn't a very long hymn, I would pop back in and restart the song. And for as long as I was on the ward, for the next hour, I just replayed this song and the patient did not cry out. And so I say that story to say the arts are essential. When I say the arts are healing, that is not just some that's not just some pretty quote to sound artsy. No, I mean it. The arts are healing. They are essential. And so I had this moment watching our Prime Minister say that about the arts. I won't judge it, but watching what they said, and it stirred up this emotion in me. And I knew that I wanted something to do with the arts. I knew that I did. I knew that I missed performing on stage. I knew that I missed acting lessons. I knew all of that. And but then, as we do, you carry on with life. You're busy. So I kind of forget, or I push that feeling aside, and I carry on with my life. And bear in mind, at this point, I've applied for a permanent training position in medicine within the NHS. It's not a short thing. You don't just apply for a job, you get a job and you start a job all the time. There are times of year that they will do their onloading, that they will do their applications process. So this has been in the works for months now. And I received that job through, and this is the job that I applied for, the A&E job. And the hospital who want to hire me, who I've been assigned to, they tell me that they've changed the job, that there was a typing mistake on the advert and that the job is no longer A&E, that it will be a different type of job. And I remember just thinking, what? That is so unfair. That is ridiculous. I was so upset. So much had been going on in my life, from the pandemic to the health issues I'd been having, so much change that I just suddenly I felt so angry about the lack of control that I had in my life. And I remember thinking to myself, this is absolutely ridiculous. You know, even the way that you apply for jobs in the NHS, you have to just list them and you can be sent anywhere in the country. So for me, I was like, I already have so little control. And then when I've done what you said, I've jumped through your hoops, you're changing the rules, telling me it was a typing mistake. And so what I did was I opened up a website of a drama school that my sister had recommended to me when I'd said that I want to be an actor. Because bearing in mind, my whole life, I would be saying to people, I want to be an actor, just randomly. And people would be like, okay. And it was one of those things you say, and it's a throwaway, you know, you chat nonsense and it's a throwaway. But like, I would literally say it, would be watching a film and be like, oh, I can redo that scene. And I would do the acting and just messing around. But it was a recurrent thing. So when me and my sister had been having one of these casual recurrent conversations, she was like, oh, there's actually a drama school that she knows about. She sends me the details. Then fast forward to this moment of anger where the NHS hospital that I was supposed to work at has changed my job without my consent or permission. I log onto the acting website and I'm like, apply. I applied for an audition and I'm like, I'm going to do this. No one's telling me not to. I'm going to change jobs. And I'm going to be an actress. Again, life carries on. I go to bed, I wake up and I'm like, maybe I should stick with my medical career. And so I message the hospital and I say, you've got to change the job. I go to church, I ask everyone to pray for me that they change the job back to what I wanted. I was like, I'm about to uproot my life from South Wales to move to England to do this job and you've changed it. That is unacceptable, And I think what essentially happens is that I pray and argue my way into the hospital creating the job that they had originally listed. So they change their minds and they give me the job that I'd originally applied for. Now, at this point, I've been so busy looking for somewhere to live in England, you know, trying to figure out how I'm going to move, where I'm going to move to, all these different things that I kind of forget. I don't forget, but I do forget about the acting school. I'm just like not really thinking about it. No, that's not strictly true because I was vlogging at the time and there is definitely a video of me sat in my car breaking down saying, what if I moved to England and become a GP and that's my life and I just do that for the next 40 years? Or what if I go to acting school and I become an actress and I do that? Or what if I go to acting school and I don't make it and no one ever wants to hire me? I'm basically just overthinking everything. But essentially, I make the decision that I'm going to take the medical job. And I start this medical job and I'm still quite unsure. And I remember my flatmate at the time who had studied acting actually, but now was working in a different field. I remember her saying to me that her rule is that she just gives everything 3 months. Like, give it 3 months. If you hate it, leave. And I didn't really think much of that when she said it. I was just like, yeah, I'll give it 3 months. But then I get this job in A&E in this hospital that I fought for. I was like, this is the job that I want. This is exactly what I want to be doing, where I want to be. I get the job. And initially it's okay, but it is very quickly, truly one of the... How much am I allowed to say about this? It is one of the worst working experiences I've ever had from, just not good, not good. And I'm not talking about my time in Cardiff. Like when I compare my time as a new doctor versus this one where I'd been a doctor for 3 years, my time in Cardiff was amazing. So this is post-pandemic, everything's busy, there's 14 4-hour waits on A&E. Patients are rightfully so upset. You're staying late, you're giving everything you can, but the working environment was not good. It was not good. And I'm deeply unhappy. Very quickly, I'm like, why am I working in full-time medicine again? I don't want to do this. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I'm this, I'm that. Well, actually, no, at that point, I didn't doubt if I was good enough. I knew that I was good at what I was doing because I had enough experience to know I was good. But the environment, I was still just going back into my insomnia, back into the living for the weekend, back into just having no hope. And then looking ahead at another 40 years of that was not lighting up my soul. And so one day I'm sat at home on one of my days off and I get an email through saying that I have an audition for the acting school in the next couple of weeks. And on the day that they've given me the audition, I happen to have the day off work. And so I decide to spend the day that I have off work prepping for this audition. I do the audition. It is a 3-hour Zoom call audition and I absolutely loved it. Which is insane because at this point in time, Zoom was the last thing you wanted to do. So it was post-pandemic. Everything had opened back up. I never wanted to do another Zoom call in my life. But there I was, absolutely loving this audition. I remember telling one of my sisters about it. She helped me prep for it, the one who had recommended the acting school to me in the first place. And she was like, whoa, you enjoyed it? Like, that, people don't usually enjoy an interview. And I was like, honestly, I would pay to do another one. It was so much fun. And fast forward, I get an offer from this acting school to attend. It's a part-time acting school. And I'm like, oh my goodness, do I do it? Do I not? I'm chatting to my sister, like, what do I do? What do I do? And, you know, there's the option to defer a year. There's this, there's that. I'm thinking about it. I'm praying about it. And I just know, I know in my knower that actually deferring a year is chickening out. If I was to defer a year, I would never have done it, because it's just saying, oh, I'll wait another year. But then you wait another year, you get a mortgage and you can't quit, or you have so much more to lose. You spend so much more time. It's almost like you've got 2 buildings that you want to climb and you've gotten halfway up one. You're like, I actually want to be climbing that building. Do I jump onto the other building? You say, no, let me climb a bit higher. Let me climb a bit higher. And it's like, actually, the buildings are leading away from each other. So as you climb the one building, you're getting further and further away from the other building. So I just knew that I couldn't defer a year, that I had to take that chance. And so what I did was I kind of weighed up the pros and cons of it. I wrote lists about what the benefits of going to acting school would be, of how I could return to medicine if I would want to, you know, how I would return to full-time medicine. And I took the leap. I wrote my resignation email, and I knew it was the right thing, because when I did it, I felt so light and so free. There was a lot of difficulty, to be honest. I had to find somewhere permanent to live. I'd been staying with my sister because the housing market, you guys, there was one weekend where I lived in a travel lodge with all my stuff in a van, because the housing market for renting was just insane. I had actually put down a deposit, was supposed to be moving somewhere, and the landlord had returned my deposit, saying that I couldn't live there because he had gone with someone else, or the agency had done that. And I was like, what are you talking about? What are you on about? I'm moving in, all my stuff is in a van. Then there was the fuel crisis, and so there was no fuel in the van, so I had to abandon the van and drive my car to this travel lodge. And at this time I was still working A&E nights. But one thing that I believe that I did well, I think I can look back on in hindsight, is that by God's grace, when I made that decision, I made that decision. One thing that I'm really grateful that my parents taught me was that you work, you work hard. And when I made that decision that I was going to do the acting school, I promised myself I would not miss a class. So for weeks I was working full-time A&E and the acting school, which meant I had to swap an insane, impossible amount of shifts. But I committed to getting that done. And here I am now, however many, 3 years later. And while I'm still on the journey and I'm still figuring out exactly what that should look like and how the story goes, right? Because I think everyone's story ends, not to be too morbid, but in quite a similar way. But while I'm still on this beautiful journey of life, 3 years in, where many of you will not have heard of me in the acting space, what I can say to you is that I'm so grateful, so happy, so fulfilled. I mean that now. I mean that. And this is me having stagnated my medical career. I'm watching my friends become consultants. I'm watching them buy houses, do all of those things. And yet I would do the same thing. I can truly say that to you. I would do the same thing. Even if, God forbid, this was where the journey, you know, there were no more success or accolades to tell you about. Even if, God forbid, this was it, worth it. So worth it. I love acting. I enjoy it. I'm so happy that I'm doing what I'm doing. And I still work in medicine part-time when I need to. And so I still have that enjoyment. In order to not go on for too long, even though it's already been a while, I'm going to end that story there. I hope that that explains more about my journey into acting. And hopefully, you know, if you're considering going into acting, gives you a bit more encouragement that if I can do it with no real claim to this space, then you can do it too. Like, we're not defined by a decision we made when we were 17 as to what course we were going to study. Like, you are a complex person. I'm a complex person. We have so much to bring, and we are always allowed to pivot and change our minds, and it can actually be a beautiful thing. And I hope that if I can encourage you in one thing, it is that there is so much beauty to be had on the side of taking the leap. And I am living testament of that. I'm so grateful to God for all that I've experienced while pursuing my new career of acting. If you have liked this episode, then please do give it a rating, rate the podcast highly, because then whatever platform you're listening to it on will share it more with people who haven't heard of the podcast. Please do leave me a comment. Join me on my social media at Dr. Sara Otung. I'm on Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. And yeah, just thank you so much for sharing this story with me. There's so much more to the story. I hope that has made sense. Yeah, there's so much more to it, but we'll leave it there. I can't tell you my literal whole life story. We'd be here for 31 years, you guys. So thank you for watching. I love you so much, and I'll see you in my next episode of the Sara Show podcast. Bye.